Her Excellency, the Ambassador of South Africa to the United States of America, Makati Shila Sisulu. Members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps, members of the clergy, elected officials, Mayor Lee Brown, university presidents, community leaders, the Board of Trustees of Rice University, faculty and students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, as the Director of Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, to welcome you to this very special event, which has been made possible by the generous support of the Shell Oil Company Foundation and Enron. The program will start with remarks by the 61st Secretary of State, James A. Baker III, who will then introduce His Royal Highness Prince Bandar bin Sultan, the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States. His Royal Highness Prince Bandar will make his remarks and then introduce our honored guest speaker, His Excellency Nelson Mandela, the former President of South Africa. After President Mandela's remarks, there will be a question and answer period based on the written questions you in the audience submit to the ushers, who will collect them during the course of the program. We will then make the presentation to President Mandela of the Baker Institute Enron Prize for Distinguished Public Service. In consideration of our honored guest, I would ask that no flash bulbs be used during this event. Join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming our distinguished participants to the stage. Dr. Malcolm Gillis, President of Rice University. The Honorable James A. Baker III, the 61st Secretary of State of the United States of America. His Royal Highness Prince Bandar bin Sultan bin Abdulaziz, the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States of America, and His Excellency Nelson Mandela, the former President of the Republic of South Africa. Thank you. James A. Baker III, the Honorary Chair of the Baker Institute, has served with great distinction in senior government positions under 3 United States presidents. His record of public service began in 1975 as Undersecretary of Commerce in President Ford's administration. He served as the 67th Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration and as Chairman of the President's Economic Policy Council. He was also White House Chief of Staff for both Presidents Reagan and Bush. As the nation's 61st Secretary of State in the Bush administration, he played a key role in some of the most dramatic historic events of our time, such as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany, building the international coalition behind Desert Storm, and the Madrid peace process, which launched the Arab-Israeli peace process. Join me in welcoming Secretary Baker to the podium.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Dirigian. Ladies and gentlemen, we are really delighted to welcome you to a very, very special occasion, one that does great honor to the Baker Institute, to Rice University, and to the City of Houston. The reason, of course, is very simple. Our speaker today is, without exaggeration, one of the most important figures of the last half of the 20th century. During my years in public life, I had the opportunity of meeting any number of world leaders, but none, and I repeat, none, was or is more deserving of the appellation great than is Nelson Mandela. I first met President Mandela in Windhoek, Namibia, just a few short weeks after his release from 27 years in prison. He was already a living legend, not just among his followers in South Africa, but for millions around the world who saw him as the very embodiment of the struggle against injustice. He lived up to his reputation, soft-spoken but determined, dignified but passionate, willing to compromise, but utterly committed, absolutely committed to his ultimate goal, the creation of a multiracial, democratic South Africa. During that same visit, I met with then South African President F.W. de Klerk. And President de Klerk told me something that I found rather startling at the time. He said, "I'm going to be the last white president of South Africa." There was no doubt in my mind, or I suspect in de Klerk's mind, about who would succeed him. 4 years later, Nelson Mandela did precisely that. Thanks to his efforts, apartheid was gone. It was gone forever, but perhaps most importantly, it was gone peacefully. Nelson Mandela is one of those rare historical figures who successfully navigate the course from being a revolutionary leader to being a national statesman. And as such, I think he bears genuine comparison with the early leaders of our own republic, men like Washington and Adams and Jefferson. And like them, he placed his stamp not just on his country and on his continent, but also on the world. As president of the new South Africa, Nelson Mandela possessed immense prestige, not just at home, but abroad. Of course, he still does. And it is a prestige that he has put to frequent and effective use in the international arena. For instance, only recently, he and our other distinguished guest successfully negotiated with Libya for the release for trial of the suspects in the bombing of Pan Am 103. That other distinguished guest is a friend of mine. He is a friend of the Baker Institute, but above all, I think he is a friend of the United States of America. As Saudi Arabia's ambassador to this country for over 16 years, he has been a key architect of one of the most important and enduring of all of our bilateral relationships. I can personally, my friends, attest to the critical role that he played in developing a joint Saudi-American strategy during the Gulf War crisis, and later, the particularly important role that he played in bringing Arabs and Israelis together at the historic Madrid Peace Conference. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to present to you the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the United States of America, His Royal Highness Bandar bin Sultan bin Abdulaziz. Your Royal Highness.
Mr. President, secretary and friend Jimmy Baker, it is with great pleasure that I am here with you all in Houston and in Texas. And since the Oilers do not reside in Houston anymore, I think I can get your support for the Dallas Cowboys, which is my team. Texas has an important special place in my heart because this is the first state I visited when I first came to this great country in 1970. And I have a memory that has been with me ever since then. Because when I first came here, I decided to call Saudi Arabia. And in those days, you couldn't dial direct. You have to call through New York to get to the Middle East. And I had difficulty explaining to the international operator where Saudi Arabia was. And I said to her finally when I was frustrated, do you know where Israel is? She said, yes. I said, well, just down south a little. And then I didn't get my call. So I decided I might, maybe if I impress her, she will respond favorably. So I said, please, this is an urgent call. And she said, what's your name? I said, and that's when I decided to impress her. Prince Bandar. She said, how do you spell your first name? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege and honor to take this suicidal mission of introducing our honorable guest today. But since I spent about 17 years of my life as a fighter pilot, it takes a stupid fighter pilot to even assume he will have to introduce a man like the man we are honoring here tonight. But I will prove to you that I have grown up since my fighter pilot days, and I'm not going to overstay my welcome. I have the distinct pleasure and honor to introduce a great human being and a great man, a citizen of the whole world, my friend Nelson Mandela.
Thank you. Thank you. Friends, I have a bit of a cold, and my voice does not want to cooperate. But I will not allow it to decide my program. In the light of what has been said here, I think I should put the matter in proper context, as I have done on a number of occasions. I was spending a holiday in the Bahamas a few years back, and I was taking a walk when I met a couple. And the gentleman stopped and said, Mr. Mandela. I said, many people mistake me for that chap. And he said, he turned to his wife and said, Mom, Mr. Mandela. She was absolutely unimpressed. And she said, what is he famous for? And the husband, in his embarrassment, dropped his voice and said, "Mr. Mandela, Mr. Mandela." She said, "I asked, what is he famous for?" And without waiting for an answer, she turned to me and said, "What are you famous for?" I couldn't answer that question. But I want to say that of the international bodies that we have, the United Nations is the most significant. One can go into details in spelling out its performance, but I just want to cite one example which I hope all of you will appreciate why we should support that organization. The First World War broke out in 1914, and 25 years later, we had the Second World War. That was in 1939 to 1945. It is now 54 years since the end of the Second World War. There has been no Third World War. It is true, there have been regional conflicts, some of them very violent, but no world conflagration has taken place since 1945. And those, therefore, who wanted to get involved in conflict resolution should always relate their activities to the world body, whether it is resolving a conflict in one country or a conflict between various countries. Once you say the United Nations, its charter calls upon all its members to try and resolve their problems by peaceful means, you then have a solid start. And depending on the specific problem you are required to solve. But the fact that you should relate your efforts to the United Nations is a very powerful weapon in your hands. We have been involved in conflict resolution in our country, when, as I have pointed out before, we had to try and change ourselves as individuals, because there's no use trying to change others if you yourself are unable to change yourself. And the problem that faced us was that our emotions said, it is revolting for me to go and talk to people whom for more than 3 centuries have persecuted our people and treated us like flies. That is what our feeling said. We were thinking through our blood when we said so. But our brains said something totally different. Our brain said, if you don't talk to your enemy, this country will go up in flames. And innocent human beings, men, women, children, and the aged, will be slaughtered. And our brains prevailed over our blood. And we sat down. We sat down and talked. When you have a strong case, you don't have to resort to violence. You actually wanted to meet your opponent because he cannot answer your case. If you give him a chance to use violence, you'll never convince him. It is going to be the strength of the weapons that you command that is going to prevail. Whereas if you sit and talk, you can put anybody with a viewpoint contrary to yours against the wall, on the carpet. And that is what we did. Now, many serious political commentators said, you will never be able to have a peaceful transformation in South Africa. We confined them. We had that peaceful transformation. We were working with the international community, especially through the United Nations. We had a second case. When it was announced that I was going to Libya, the State Department worked a figure at me and said, if you go there, we will withdraw our aid to South Africa. I must confess, I spoke more from my blood, which was boiling, than from my brain. And I said, nobody anywhere in the universe, not only in the world, in the universe, is going to dictate to me. I am going to Libya. Then they countered by saying we will withdraw our aid to South Africa. I say, please withdraw it. In any case, the aid you are giving us in comparison with the aid you are getting from others is peanuts. But a very humorous member of the Congress put me on the carpet. He said, well, if it is peanuts, don't eat them. But I went to Libya, and many people, including heads of states, said you will never be able to convince Gaddafi to hand over those suspects. I and His Royal Highness here, representing King Fahd, we were able to persuade Gaddafi to hand over those suspects. We won his confidence. Again, in that case, we worked closely with the United Nations, and we kept on reminding President Gaddafi that the Charter calls upon all of us, including you, to try and settle problems through dialogue, through peaceful methods. Now, I do therefore urge you that when you face any situation bear in mind consciously the Charter of the United Nations. But because this is a university and there are many students here, I want to tell a story of a young man who left his village to go and look for a good wife. For this purpose, he crossed vast plains, famous rivers, and the highest mountains, and visited every major city of that day. He met beauty queens, princesses, actresses, rich and influential women, women from the countryside and from the urban areas. And when he had gone right round that world, he could not see the girl he was looking for. He then returned to his fatherland and eventually reached his village. He was going back to die because he saw no reason why he should continue living when he had failed in his most fervent dream. But as he entered his village, he saw the girl from next door. They were about the same age. They went to the same school. They went out dancing together. But throughout that period, he never saw in this woman the girl of his dreams. But having gone right round the world, he now realized that this is the woman he left his village to go and look for, leaving her next door. What that means is that you must develop self-confidence, confidence in yourself, because you are not only an asset to the nation, not only leaders of tomorrow. Each and every one of you has the ability, the qualities to reach at the top position in your country, as long as you have confidence in yourself and then acquire the best instrument for you to be able to save your society, which is education. Now, I would like to urge young people not only to think in terms of themselves as individuals. Of course, you must improve yourself in order to be able to serve your society. But you acquire that education in order to serve your country. As it has been said by a writer coming from this area, that one of the striking features of modern times is the emergence in every part of the country, of the globe, of men and women who have selected the world as the theater of their operations, who are able to fight the suppression of human rights, the question of illiteracy, the question of poverty, which is the single most important challenge facing humanity today. Those men and women are prepared to fight these social evils wherever in the world they are to be found. We in South Africa have been the beneficiaries of that new feature which has been identified by this author in this part of the world. And that is the reason why we have enormous respect for the international community and for the masses of the people in the United States of America and elsewhere who demonstrated almost every day in the South African embassy to say we are here to tell you that we are part and parcel of those who have condemned apartheid as a crime against humanity. The people of South Africa would have fought hard even without the support of the international community. But the cost of that struggle would have been too crushing for us. And it would have taken a long time for us to liberate our country. We were able to liberate our country because we were supported by the United Nations and the international community as a whole. We are therefore very grateful, and we don't know exactly what words to choose, which will indicate to you the depth of our indebtedness to you. Now, as I concluded my remarks somewhere yesterday, I was having a discussion with a 5-year-old young lady who then asked me, "How old are you?" I said, "Well, I really do not know, but I was born long, long ago." She said, 5 years ago? I say, no, much longer than that. Then she asked, "Why did you go to jail?" I say, "No, I didn't go to jail because I wanted. Some people sent me there." "Who?" I say, "People who didn't like me." She said, "How long did you stay there?" I say, again, I can't remember. But it was a very, very long time. And she said, "You are a stupid old man, aren't you?" Now, if you think what I have said here is stupid, please be a little more diplomatic than that young lady.
Mr. President, before we begin the questions and answers, I would like to read a letter that we just received at the Baker Institute from former President George Bush. Dear Mr. President, you will always be Mr. President to me. I am distressed that I will have to miss your appearance at the wonderful Baker Institute. Had I not been out of town, I would certainly have been there to join in as your many friends in Texas salute you and honor you. You have been an inspiration to so many, and that includes every single member of the Bush family. Thank you ever so much for your thoughtful phone call last week. That meant a great deal to me. Respectfully yours, George Bush. Mr. President, there are hundreds of questions, but I will try to. I will.
I just want to comment about this letter from President George Bush. Our struggle has been remarkable because it has received support from all political tendencies in the country. I have told the story that the first person to telephone me the day I came out of jail was President George Bush, to say, welcome home, and I invite you to come to the United States of America. But there was an interesting incident because a young fellow of about 13 or 14 came to the room where I was, and he said, there is a guy called George Bush who wants to speak to you. I said, no, that's the President of the United States of America. And I went to take the call. A little later, he phoned me, and somebody answered the phone at home and said, oh, President George Bush. Now, my grandson, who was about 3 years of age, listened to this. And after that, every time the telephone rang, he ran to the telephone, picked it up and said, Bush, Bush. So I'm reminded of those incidents by this generous letter. Thank you.
Many questions about hopes for Africa. And this is a question from the faculty at Rice University. The last 30 years have been characterized by Afro-pessimism. What are your hopes for Africa in the next 25 years?
Can you please come closer to me and just,
Yes.
just remember I'm 91, huh?
The last 30 years have been characterized by Afro-pessimism.
I see.
What are your hopes for Africa in the next 25 years?
Thank you. Well, you all have heard the question. I think it's a misconception to talk of Afro-pessimism. Whatever the position was during the colonial days, from the moment Ghana became free in 1957 and became the third country, African country, to be free, next to Ethiopia and Liberia, the mood of optimism was at its highest peak. In fact, one of the mistakes we made in South Africa as the liberation movement was immediately after the end of the World War, as a result of the statements by leading heads of states of the world, in which they announced that we have crushed fascism. We believe, and our slogan was, freedom in our lifetime. We were over-optimistic. And when I went to the conference of PAFMEXA in Addis Ababa in February 1962, I then said in my address, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria has called on South Africa to liberate our people within 10 years. That was in 1962. And President Kenneth Kaunda, of course, he was not president at the time, but he was already an acknowledged leader. He said, Africa is not prepared to wait 10 years. We want freedom now. That was a mood of pessimism. We had a period where we had one-party states. But as a result of discussions, as a result of pressure from the democratic world, Africa abandoned the idea of one-party states and decided to have multi-party states. Today, throughout Africa, with a few exceptions, you have a democratically elected government, and you have a leadership which is not only highly gifted, but experienced, and whose policies, as I have said, are people-orientated and who are rising to the challenges facing them. Of course, we still have problems: poverty, corruption, unemployment. These are problems which you find in the old industrial countries as well. And it's no surprise that you find them in Africa. But the mood of optimism, where we now, people like President Mbeki, our president in South Africa, is piloting the idea of an African renaissance in which he is calling upon the people of Africa to take their destiny in their hands and not to look for intervention from outside the continent. Is there any greater confidence than that?
President, there are many questions on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, such as the one you established in South Africa. Do you think it could help heal some of the wounds of ethnic conflict in other countries? I'll ask.
Okay.
Several questions on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mr. President, do you think that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission such as the one you established in South Africa can help heal some of the wounds of ethnic conflict in other countries?
I cannot speak for other countries, especially without knowing the concrete conditions under which they address problems. But for South Africa, it was one of the best methods to heal the wounds, to make the next of kin know what happened to their beloved. We set up that commission very carefully. I was given by a committee which was set up to recommend to me the names of people who should form this commission. They gave me 40 names, and I had to select 17. I made sure that that commission was fully inclusive. No shade of political opinion was left out. And we selected one of the most outstanding leaders in South Africa, Archbishop Tutu. We selected him to preside over that commission. It made a lot of mistakes. It showed a lot of weaknesses. But the overall picture was a commission which did an excellent job. And it cut the wound open, cleaned it, and the process of healing is now taking place. Many people were shocked when the previous security police came and said, "We buried this man alive. We asked another one to dig a grave, and then while standing above the grave, they shot him into the grave." And the next of kin saying, "We excuse you. We know the conditions under which you carried out these orders. We excuse you." I had an officer in my security who had served the apartheid regime, a white officer, an Afrikaner. And after I was with him for 6 months, the senior police officials came and said, "Look, this man in your security took part in bombing Khotso House. That is where the Council of Churches in South Africa operated from, like people like Bishop Tutu. They say he was part of those who bombed that house. So I say, so what? They say he is a security danger. I said, I'm not going to punish a young man, destroy his future, because he was instructed by his seniors to carry out that dirty job. I am interested in the people who gave him those instructions. Those are the people I want. If you want me, to deal with the situation, tell me who instructed him. Then I will deal with that man. But this young fellow has proved very innocent to me, and I'm not going to dismiss him. Now, that is the mood. I'm not an exception. That is the mood that is prevailing in South Africa as a result of people who have come forward to say, this is what we did. And when you listen to those stories, it's very difficult to accept that these things were done by human beings. But that has brought about a new situation in the country where the community from whom the security police were recruited those days feel today very much ashamed. And they have become, therefore, supporters, some of the enthusiastic supporters of worthy causes. And we have forgotten the past. We have been able to go to our people to say, that was a painful past, but let's forget it. Let us now work together to build our country. And that work is going on very well because the TRC has made it possible for us to know what actually happened. And that is why we have forgiven.
How real is the possibility of a successful separatist movement that is being waged by the Afrikaner population?
There was a time when the right wing in South Africa was a real danger. In fact, 3 weeks before the election, the general election of 1994, we discovered that they had decided to use force to stop the elections. They had set a date. I called the leaders of the right wing, and I said to them, I have discovered that you have planned to stop the election by violence. Is that true? And one of them, who was the commander, the national commander of the South African Defense Force, a very honest Afrikaner, he said, yes, Mr. President, it is so. Saying president of the ANC at that time because the election had not taken place. And he says, I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of bloodshed. The Afrikaners are arming. I said, you will give us a hard time. You are better trained as soldiers than ourselves. You command very dangerous weapons, and because of your resources, you know the country better than we do. You will reduce this country into ashes and bring suffering to innocent civilians. But at the end of that, we will crush you. We haven't reached this position. We haven't reached this position where everybody expects that we are going to be the next government, with your permission. We have reached it in spite of what you have tried to do. We will crush you. because we have a just cause you do not have. We have numbers you do not have. We have the support of the international community you do not have. What is the use of engaging in such a suicide instead of going to Kempton Park, where 25 other political parties were negotiating? The leader of the South African Army, the former leader, decided to break out from this group, and he went to negotiate. Now, from that day, we started marginalizing the right wing. And today, one of their leaders, a chap called Eugene Terebranch, who had carried a swastika in his uniform, and in everything that he did, he imitated Hitler, because when Hitler addressed meetings, he wouldn't have a piece of paper. He would just go to a meeting and start talking. So this chap was imitating him. He was drawing larger crowd than the president of the country, President de Klerk. But we have so marginalized them that he cannot even call 5 members to a meeting. And in any case, he's going to jail now. So the right wing is no danger to us. But there are few individuals who still want to go back to the old days. We are not excited. We let them to talk. And one of the things that I've done is to form what is called a Nelson Mandela Foundation for development, for peace, for reconciliation, and for justice. And I am calling some of these rogue elements to say, sit down. What is your case? We have a beautiful country. Both black and white, friend and foe, have forgotten their differences. We are building our country. What is your case? They can't state it. We have completely marginalized everybody who is thinking of a separatist movement. But we can't stop people from thinking widely. We can't stop them. But the point is that they are no threat at all to the unity of South Africa.
This is a question from a 12-year-old in the audience. I would like to know, Mr. President, what you most want to be remembered for doing, what means the most to you in your heart.
Well, I would like to be remembered as a 91-year-old pensioner who's looking for a job. Now, it is for humanity of a society to decide how I should be remembered. A commentator from the BBC, many of you would have seen it, about 2 or 3 years ago, said Mandela is a useless chap. He has done nothing either for his country or for humanity. I then replied that I welcome such statement because they destroy this myth that somebody is an angel and cannot be criticized. I never wanted to be regarded as an angel. I'm an ordinary human being with weaknesses, some of them fundamental, and I've made many mistakes in my life. I am not a saint, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. Thank you. Thank you.